having gotten married to my childhood sweetheart, that became kind of difficult. So while I was in the Navy, I took the test for the police force, and I got appointed a little under a year after I left the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just stepped from one thing into the other, one job into the other. 1964, I was in the academy at that time for 4 months. Today it's a little longer. And I got assigned to a precinct in the Bronx upon graduating from the academy in 1965 in January.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a little over a year in uniform in the 42nd precinct, and I got picked up for some plainclothes work. Actually, it all started with a homicide of a young person, and they actually needed someone to interpret, so I got picked out of the street patrol, and I did a couple of weeks interpreting on a homicide investigation, and I guess I impressed the inspector, who was the borough commander. Next thing I knew, I was assigned to Plainclothes, so I didn't go back to uniform for a few years, and after my about 3 years in Plainclothes, there were a few incidents, street riots, and the major disorders in the city.
And this was in the 60s?
In the 60s, 68,
Mm-hmm.
67. Where everybody would go back into uniform
Mm-hmm.
to help the patrol force. In 68, I get promoted to the detective division. Although I had been working on plainclothes, I was still what they call a white shield. So I went to a Brooklyn command in Brooklyn South Detective Task Force, where we did borough-wide work, special assignments, different street conditions that needed attention, but not by the uniform force, by people in plain clothes. And in 1969, I got assigned to a detective command then in the 83rd Squad, which is in the 83rd Precinct, naturally. I spent about 4 years there until the department changed. It went into specialization, and so I had an opportunity to come back to the Bronx, and I was assigned to the Homicide Squad in 1972, and I spent my next 22 years in the Homicide Squad until my 30th. Bronx, the 7th Division, let me think back. It was the 7th Division Homicide. It was 7th Division Homicide at that time, because the borough was broken up into 3 divisions.
Right.
7th, the South Bronx, which was the busiest, 8th and 9th. 9th being up in the North Bronx and West Bronx, Riverdale and that area, which was less active.
So essentially it came together.
In 1979, they did away with the divisions, and the Homicide Squad became a borough-wide unit. So we
Gotcha.
worked the entire Bronx then. But we spent most of our time in the 7th Division because that's where most of the activity was. Well, obviously, I would think that the major homicide case of perhaps in New York City of the century had to be the Happy Land fire, which was an arson murder case where there were, I believe it was 92 deaths. This individual had separated from his girlfriend. They had lived together, and she used to work in this social club, the Happy Land, it was called, and she worked at the entrance. She sold tickets for people to come into. People paid her, and she gave them a ticket, and they were given access. Since they had broken up, he actually went by the club, tried to talk to her, and next thing you know, it kind of got a little loud. The bouncer put him out, and this is all by his own statements after he was apprehended. He actually went around the neighborhood looking for an empty can or something where he could get some gasoline, and he had decided he was going to torch this club. In the meantime, the club was fully crowded, 2 levels. The dance was upstairs, the lower level were bars, and so he actually was able to get someone to help him get some gasoline from a gas station, and then he came back, poured it at the door, and he lit it. The building went up, and it resulted in 92 deaths.
Wow.
His girlfriend was, fortunately, she escaped, and when we responded, it was the worst scene you could ever. It looked like a war zone. Bodies all over the place on both levels. Some people burned to death, others were just suffocated because the smoke killed the people on the upper level. And
my understanding, they were also some people were holding each other, trying.
Some people have actually collapsed where they were dancing.
Wow. From
the lack of oxygen and smoke inhalation. And his girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, had actually escaped. When there were 2 doors, one was actually secured, but she was able to squeeze through the opening that she and 5 other people created. They were the only survivors. And so she put us onto her ex-boyfriend. Although she didn't witness it, she believed that it might have had something to do with it. We tracked him down, and within 24 hours we had him in custody, and he completely confessed immediately. He stated that he didn't expect that so many people would die. He didn't realize that a gallon of gasoline was so explosive, and so it wasn't too difficult a case to break, but it's certainly it's the worst scene that you want to see.
Caused so much devastation too.
Complete devastation of the establishment, and just an incredible amount of suffering and bodies, and people coming to identify the bodies. It was something that you never forget. You know, that stays in your memory forever. We were very busy at the morgue for days trying to get the people identified, you know, which again was just a horrible situation. That was like the most, the case that has so much emotional impact. Yeah. Then of course there are many other cases.
Any other 2 that were pretty significant on the news that you were involved
yeah,
with?
well, children cases were always significant. You know, you can't believe the inhumanity that that occurs. How individuals can butcher a child. You never forget that, you know. And so those were the cases. In particular, this one case with his 8-year-old boy had a fight in school, and so he came home for lunch. He didn't want to go to the lunchroom, and he walked home. He had a key to his house. His mother was at a clinic, and he walks in on two burglars whom he knew. They were actually two brothers who went around with a Bible. They used to go to a Pentecostal church, and that's where they would pick out their victims. And they would set up a scenario where they would know when a family was going to be out of the apartment, and they would try to break in, usually through the fire escape. So in this case, these two individuals are in the house. The boy comes home for lunch because the fight that he had in school, and he walks in upon them. And so they decided, well, he knows them, so they tied him up with his father's neckties, bound his legs and his arms behind the back. Then they shoved a kitchen knife about a foot long. They shoved it through his neck, and it came out his ear. Actually speared this little boy.
Wow.
And you never forget that.
Right.
They escape in different routes. One brother went out the front door, the other brother went back out the fire escape, and fortunately a neighbor heard commotion or someone on the fire escape. She looks out the window and recognizes the individual going down the fire escape from the church that she also attended. So it was at first a little difficult to get her to give this information up because she was terrified. But based on our experience, we knew that she had observed something or she heard something because of the fear that she showed.
And those individuals were apprehended as well, too.
Say again?
They were apprehended?
Yes, of course, yeah. She gave us information as to where one individual either resided or came from or hung out. And so with the description of the clothing, we were able to grab one guy. Again, fortunately, it wasn't such a difficult case in that we had something to go on right away. So we grabbed one brother, and subsequently we apprehended the second brother. And although they didn't confess to the crimes, we were able to get them identified on a lineup by one of the witnesses who saw the escape. And subsequently we had enough information and fingerprint information that we were able to charge both of them with this horrific murder of this child. That was a horrible case, and of course we've had other children,
many other
who
cases,
were victims of sexual rapes, and I'm talking about children.
What about
under 10.
any cases like the FBI were involved, or where it was like a suspect that had shot police? Or
well, we had the FBI involved in a case with an individual who he's dead now, so I can mention his name, Larry Davis. You
were in the papers, I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah, all these cases received notoriety in the newspapers and television and what have you. But this individual was a serial killer. He had approximately 5-6 cases, Long Island and the Bronx, and also one in Manhattan. As it turned out, we were able to apprehend this guy through the fact that he had talked and bragged about some of his cases, and we eventually we were able to grab him. We actually had observed him in the neighborhood at different times in the Bronx, and he subsequently gave exculpatory statements in which he would always put himself like at the scene, but he wasn't involved as far as the actual killing. But we knew otherwise based on fingerprints, and in one of the cases there was a witness also that saw the perpetrator entering and leaving a crime scene. One of the murder cases.
So how many murders in total did he have?
In my 22 years in homicide?
No, regarding Larry Davis.
Oh, that individual, we had him on 5 homicides that we tried him on. Actually 6.
6.
Yeah, 6 homicides, yeah.
So he gave up, he surrendered to you and the other gentleman?
He didn't surrender to us. We had to get the FBI involved because when we had him trapped in a location, he wasn't going to go anywhere because we had him trapped on a 12th floor.
Webster, right?
Webster Avenue on a project. And so he couldn't get out unless he went out the window, which was like 12 stories up. No fire escape. So we had to get the FBI involved because he was actually afraid to surrender to us. And the FBI assisted us in having him give up his weapon, come out the door. They grab him, turn him over to myself. I put my cuffs on him, and we...
yeah, I did see the Daily News. There was a photograph of you.
And there were quite a few... because this went on like for almost 24 hours, a siege where he couldn't escape, but he would surrender to us. You know, so he's a tough guy, but he was actually afraid of. From 68, when I was in a detective unit, to 94 when I retired. The murder rate would go up every year until in the early 90s in the city we had over 2,500 homicides in the city. The Bronx alone.
Within a year?
Within 12 months, yeah, 1 year. And in the Bronx, we hit a high of approximately 650 homicides for 1 year. And I believe that was in 1990. Which was the year also of the Happy Land fire, the arson, multiple homicides.
So significantly lower now.
Oh, it's the whole city now. I think that the entire city last year had perhaps close to 300.
So 300 in 2013.
Something like that.
Yeah, 2013.
Yeah. And in the Bronx, I believe they might have reached 100. Or it might have been under 100. I'm not sure about the body count, but I mean, you know, if you're talking about comparing 600 something to 100, yes, a big difference. But still, 100 homicides is still a lot. I like to think not, but I guess it's just that you don't forget certain cases. You know, you don't forget the children homicides. You know, you may be watching TV and you get flashbacks to what you dealt with. You know, and you never forget certain victims. There were so many that it's hard to remember all of them.
Right.
But especially gruesome cases, you know. The children cases you never forget.
Yeah.
Not recent, but because now actually I'm retired 20 years from the PD.
Right.
I got retired in 94. I went from 64 to 94. But in the early years of my retirement, yes. Now, quite frankly, the people that I work with and the people that knew me are all retired too.
Yeah.
And many of my friends have passed away also my co-workers. Recently, I attended a funeral of my last partner.
Wow.
Well, it's an emotionally rewarding job because the idea is to help people to in uniform patrol. You know, you want to look out for your fellow citizen. When you get into investigative work, you need to help, or you want to help the family of the victims, in particular in homicide, because of course the victim is gone, but the family is around. And so it's very rewarding in that sense. And fortunately, as I go back, we had a very good clearance rate of all our murder cases, where if you didn't break a case in 1 year, you would break it in the next or the following year. So ultimately, we would have close to a 90% clearance rate, and that's very rewarding, because you've brought a measure of justice to those who remain behind. Well, as a fair individual, a person that, when it comes to the police work, that I was sincere and fair to everyone, especially the family of the victims. You had to consider that they look up to you to solve what has happened in their family, you know. And so I'm sure that today, you know, because you never forget these occurrences. So today, I'm sure there are people that still remember me, my name, and because of the measure of justice that I was able to help provide for them. That is probably the most satisfying thing that you get out of the job that I was involved with. Of course, you have different aspects of police work and different measures of gratitude and accomplishments. Yeah.
So I wanted to also just thank you for sharing this experience with us. And
it's my pleasure. No problem at all.